You know most of these pieces. It's going to start us off. Then we'll go to Rocklynn and talk about some of the things in Winthrop. And Rocklynn's been active on pretty much all the meetings. I really appreciate her cross-cutting contributions to this effort. Liz Walker is focused on the clean air issues and health. Julie on the economic issues. Kelly on how do we address some of the equity and the vulnerable populations. Alyssa's been a true contributor on bringing the agricultural voice to our process. Sarah for natural systems and for water. And then Kent Woodruff will bring us home with his discussions of natural systems. So Betsy, we want to start with you, and I will put your slide up, and then you just tell me when you want me to advance to the next slide.
Okay, thanks, Mark. I'm not sure if this is the most current set, but we will go for it. So I participated on behalf of Methow Recycles in the mitigation task force, and we focused on how we might both in an infrastructure way and individually systematically reduce our use of fossil fuel and its emissions. Next slide. In his most recent film, Sir David Attenborough illustrated very beautifully that there is just no waste in nature. What is a discard of one system feeds the next system, and he implored us to please just don't waste. So I take a lot of inspiration from that and hope you do too. Next slide. We often look at our greenhouse gas emissions in a pie chart that looks like this, where the three largest contributors are transportation, electricity, and industry. And it's important to ask ourselves, well, what are these three sectors doing? And a big chunk of what they're doing is extracting, manufacturing, and transporting goods and food to consumers. Next slide. And that accounts for about 42% of greenhouse gas emissions, 29% on goods, and 13% on foods. So we have a huge opportunity through our everyday choices to reduce that 42%. Next slide. We can skip that one. Next slide. Most of us grew up thinking that recycling was about reducing litter or about saving a tree. And the truth is it's about saving energy. When we make things like cans and paper and glass from scratch, in other words, from raw materials, it takes a huge investment of fossil fuels, basically, to make those products. And when we make them the next time from recycled feedstocks, that investment is preserved and it uses a lot less energy because they can be worked into the recipe with a lot lower heat. So another important thing for you to know about this slide is that 4 of these things, aluminum, copper, steel, and glass, can be recycled almost indefinitely, so they continue to preserve that investment. Next slide.
I think that's it for you.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. So a couple of things that we focused on in the task force, actionable items were, we thought a lot about Methow at Home and the work they do to help community members, and focusing on insulation and weatherization. We thought, boy, wouldn't it be great if we had a crew of volunteers who were experienced with assessing weatherization opportunities and providing the technical assistance to help businesses and homeowners make those changes. And that might require a little advocacy as well to provide the funding for that. And then in terms of the Methow conservation ethic, there are 2 simple things that you can do right now. And the biggest one is question whether the waste you generate is inevitable, and look for opportunities to eliminate all you can by buying durable items, by buying only as much as you know you will use, whether it's food or construction materials. And buy local, buy used, share what you have, borrow it from your neighbor or a friend, or Methow Recycles. And then lastly, the second thing is weatherize your home and help your neighbors weatherize their homes. And there's lots more that Mitigation Task Force talked about, but I am now going to introduce Rocklynn Culp, 4th generation Okanagan County resident and awesome town planner for Winthrop.
Thanks, Betsy. So I'm the town planner for the town of Winthrop, so I'm kind of going to talk from that perspective. Yeah, this has been a fantastic process. Lots of really great minds thinking about all different aspects of this, and I've learned a lot through the process. So what I'm going to talk about is sort of the focus on the built environment and infrastructure and how that connects to mitigation. Being a planner, I'm going to highlight number one, the need for land use planning that sets us up for long-term solutions in the built environment. Basically, the pattern that we end up with on the landscape starts with our planning, and so we need to set ourselves up for success with that, and some ambitious goals and some buy-in around some patterns of development that will help us be more efficient in our use of resources. Again, I want to highlight that, land use planning around efficient development and also solid, up-to-date infrastructure that is more efficient in delivery of the resources that we use, water, and then transportation infrastructure, all of the different structures that we put in place that support how we live on the landscape. And then also, one of the things in terms of land use is to consider the impacts of possible immigration due to climate change. We don't really have a lot of knowns around that, but we can definitely anticipate that there will be a lot of climate migration happening. I think it's already happening in other places that are affected, and where I think we will see pressures. And so careful land use planning and efficient use of our resources is going to be all the more important for that reason. The other thing I want to talk about is our transportation system. Obviously, the transportation sector came out as one of the lead sources of greenhouse gases locally. And so that's one place we have a really significant opportunity to do some good. So the areas that we highlighted are having a solid, well-connected transportation system that minimizes the amount of travel that needs to happen, electrification of the transportation system, improving our local transit and rideshare type programs so that there's less time where we're driving alone in cars to go 10, 20 miles at a time. And then also making active transportation a more natural and easy and safe choice for people. I think right now, it can be hard to get on a bike and ride from Twisp to Winthrop if you don't feel safe doing it, and not everybody does, for sure. Especially, we don't feel safe putting our kids on bikes and sending them up and down the valley. Another area that I would highlight is housing and housing affordability in particular. I think it was highlighted in the presentation that one of the things we can expect is our cost of living to increasingly go up in relation to the pressures of climate change. And so we need to really get on that. We're already seeing the impacts from the fires and the loss of housing from that. So continuing to emphasize efficient development of housing, supporting programs that already exist, like the Methow Housing Trust and Okanagan Housing Authority, working with them to generate solutions that work for all different types of families and individuals that live in the valley. And then making sure that we're thinking about, as Betsy was indicating, efficient use of the materials in our construction, because waste there is another form of loss to our systems. So, and then the fourth little point I wanted to make, or it's not really a little point, but the fourth thing I wanted to emphasize is the importance of that concept of equity in the built environment. We want to make sure that the expense of mitigating for climate change is supported in ways that make the Methow Valley an affordable place for people to live. And unless we keep that equity piece kind of central in our thinking, it becomes harder and harder for people on the lower end of our economic spectrum to survive in the valley. So yeah, those are the things I wanted to highlight, and I'm going to hand it over to Liz Walker, who has been Director of Clean Air Methow for the past several years. She seeks solutions for a sustainable clean air shed in the Methow Valley. And she is an environmental health toxicologist by training and the mother of 2 awesome kids. Take it away, Liz.
Thanks, Rocklynn. So as Rocklynn said, I participated on the health sector of this Climate Action Plan Task Force. And you saw that one of the priorities articulated there was implement a smoke-ready community initiative. So I have 3 minutes, and I hope to convince you that a sustainably clean air shed for the Methow is possibly as critical as a sustainably clean watershed for our resilient future. So I took over leadership of Clean Air Methow from Raleigh Bowdoin several years ago, and I've since worked with many, many partners in the Valley towards clean air for everyone. The hard reality is that our smoke exposure is going to increase likely for the next few decades, both due to wildfires with near and far origins, increases in prescribed burning to improve forest health, which are critically needed, outdoor burning from growth or land clearing, private land management and cleanup for those of us who need to deal with all our leaves or pine needles or have 10, 20, 30 acres or more to firewise, and from our longstanding source of air pollution, which is wood smoke from winter home heating. What does all this smoke mean for our health and safety? We know that the disease burden includes increased rates of lung disease, cardiac events, and increases in overall mortality. But what we really don't know is how prevalent or serious those effects are going to be. This is something of an unprecedented experiment. And what the effects or how serious they'll be on our kids growing up in this new reality, for things like the productivity of livestock and agriculture that also depend on clean air, and certainly for people like our outdoor workers who have to care for animals or the harvest during wildfire seasons. So this is the bad news. The good news is that much of a Methow Valley specific and comprehensive plan to reduce unnecessary burning where possible and protect our health where needed has already been drafted. It incorporates both concepts of building preparedness for inevitable and uncontrollable smoke and programs to reduce that smoke where possible. So the first steps of becoming a smoke-ready community really involve an outreach campaign to broaden our awareness about the importance of our air quality and the likelihood of how that's going to change into the future. This would include things such as how to find information. We have a fantastic new resource at cleanairmethow.org that gives us some very hyper-local and relevant information, as well as a unique network. Most of you may know that we have 23 purple air sensors from Lost River Airport to Pateros that give us real-time air quality, in addition to 2 sensors that the Department of Ecology maintains in Winthrop and Twisp. So we have a lot of air quality data. And so it's important that we know how to access and implement and interpret that and how we might need to change our behaviors. Smoke-ready community outreach would discuss how to protect our health. So 2 critical actions here are messaging and programs to ensure that everyone can create clean indoor air during our wildfire smoke events. A second action is to normalize and help mitigate the mental and emotional effects of living with annual natural disasters and smoke. It's one of the top things that our healthcare providers have reported being concerned about with regards to our health and well-being. And then, on the flip side of protecting ourselves, smoke readiness also really includes our coordinated efforts to reduce smoke wherever possible. This could be things like promoting clean home heating, promoting clean home heating and developing affordable large-scale alternatives to outdoor burning, such as chipping or composting, or pilots such as our biochar initiative underway. When we have to burn to dispose of vegetative material, we can promote best practices for drying fuels and burning on a day with good ventilation, never on a day with a burn ban or stagnation warning. These simple practices can dramatically reduce potential smoke exposures in our community. So what do we need to implement this smoke ready plan? It needs coordination and funding. Like the climate action plan overall, many partners have a piece of this preparedness as well as implementation, including public health, healthcare and social workers, individuals, towns, and the county. So I thank you all for showing up tonight, and thank you for your consideration of how you can be part of that smoke ready community. Oh, sorry, and now I'm going to turn it over to Julie, who is not in the Methow, as we can see currently.
Thank you, Liz. Yes, hi everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. I'm Julie Tate-Libby, and I'm the program director for TwispWorks, and I've been working with the economy subcommittee for the past year, going over ideas and plans and lots of conversation. And I want to say from the outset that our biggest conversation has been around equity and access to resources for everyone. And just with the idea that climate change cannot be divorced from people's daily lives and how they make their living. And this is not an issue between, environmentalists and non-environmentalists, but that, we want to create something that everybody can get on board with. So briefly, the four main actions that we came up with was one, to diversify our local economy, to advance universal affordable broadband, adapt and develop facilities that promote community connectivity. And we had a lot of discussions in here on trail systems and commuter trails and things like that. And then the fourth one was to provide education for businesses and organizations. And Mark, you can go to the next slide. And I wanted to say here too, Joshua said I should mention this, that we launched a survey at TwispWorks 3 weeks ago. It's called the Resident Second Homeowner and Remote Worker Survey. And as of today, we had 275 responses, and climate change came out as 73% of people said it was the #1 top priority of concern for the Methow Valley. And this was out of 10 different issues of concern, including poverty and gentrification and things like that. So I think that's really telling that we're all on the same page, and that we really do know that climate change matters for the Methow Valley. So I wanted to put that in there. That's kind of a new bit of information. So the two things I want to discuss in detail are diversifying our local economy. And we are lucky in the Methow to have the Methow Investment Network. Local investment networks are great because they keep the investment money, the interest that somebody pays on a loan, they keep it in a local area. So it's kind of a closed system. And so also with local investment networks, you can really promote a diversity of jobs and opportunities and businesses that, non-traditional loans, cannot achieve. So I think expanding and relying more on our local investment network here is a wonderful resource, and to think about ways that we can really reach people with different and innovative ideas. We need an economy that is not just based on tourism, because that's so affected by climate change. And then the second kind of agenda with that was to shop local. And, we've heard a lot about that tonight, and we know that shopping local is great, but we believe that a concerted, mitigated effort to educate people on the value of shopping local and how that can reduce waste and transportation and emissions and things like that is a big part of our economy, that we can actually really do this. And then to promote carbon-friendly businesses like biochar. There's been quite a bit of conversation around that, and other non-extractive industries that can be healthy and good for the environment, and that can increase jobs and wages here in the Methow. And then the second sort of agenda item that we talked about was to provide education for businesses and organizations. And part of this would include a good tourist brochure. And so we are actually moving ahead, partnering with WasteWise and Methow Recycles and some other groups to come up with, we want to educate our visitors to say, hey, driving up to Washington Pass every day that you're here, maybe not the best thing, or maybe we can do a ride share, but to come up with like the top 10 climate-friendly things that visitors and tourists can do in the Methow to alleviate their impact on our natural environment. And so that's one of the areas we'd like to address. And then the second one is like a good business brochure. And this would be part of creating a local climate-friendly endorsement program. So businesses could really lead the way. And we've talked a lot about that businesses in the private sector can be kind of ambassadors for climate change. So when people come over from Seattle and they stop in Mazama, that they can, the businesses will be climate friendly businesses, and they can help kind of promote the idea that this is who we are and this is our values here. And so we've had a lot of conversation about how we can do that from the business community. And as part of that, the TwispWorks launched the Small Business Emergency Grant this year during COVID, and we funded 48 businesses. We've gone through 4 cycles of funding for these they're small grants, $1,500. But in the future, actually starting in January, we'll be pivoting those grants to have a call out for businesses who are looking to pivot and have climate friendly practices, whether it's installing solar panels or something like that. So that's another immediate thing that we're excited about encouraging. So we really want to help come behind our business community and encourage environmentally responsible practices and show that everybody can do it. So I think that's all I had to say for that. And after me, Kelly Edwards is the Associate Director for Room 1, and she'll be talking about equity from their perspective.
Great. Thanks, Julie. Yeah, hello, everyone. I participated in the task force on the Health and Human Impact Subcommittee, along with Liz Walker. And it really has, I'm just so grateful to the entire task force and the leadership about how central value, the whole group has made equity a central value to how we are thinking about solutions in this plan. And I think you can all imagine how, the changing climate creates a genuine phenomenon called eco-anxiety for all of us, where something feels so large and so big and often so beyond our control. And one of the beauties of this, of an action plan like this is, I think all the solutions you're hearing about from all the task force members are genuinely things within our reach that we can do either individually or together. So I think taking those steps to help alleviate some of that anxiety and stress that we feel in the face of climate change. And you can imagine layering that eco-anxiety on top of folks that are experiencing daily stressors, just trying to get by, just trying to make ends meet, trying to find safe and stable housing and livable wages for their families and their kiddos. So we're just layering stress upon stress. And the joy of this action plan is how many of the solutions are solutions that many of us have been advocating for some time as being win-wins for our working class, lower income populations. The ideas of affordable housing solutions that are more centrally located to support a workforce that can sustain this valley is something, I know a number of us have been working for a long time. The idea of improved public transit options so that our workforce can go up and down the valley as needed to get to work even at the off hours to staff our restaurants and other things. The idea of weatherization is fantastic. And we talked to a lot of different elders and families who would love to weatherize their homes or their rental units or their lower income housing. And they just don't have either the means to do it or the physical capability to do the weatherization work. And we could imagine within this plan, one of our ideas is thinking about a job corps that can support and fund kind of a workforce of younger folks, more able-bodied folks who can get out there and really help weatherize these rental and low-income housing units so that we can really make efficient use of the housing structures that we do have already in place. And then I think an additional solution that hasn't yet been mentioned, but that is again, one we've been long advocating for as being a benefit to our working families in the Valley is this idea of an indoor rec center. I think Liz touched on the need for clean indoor air during certain critical times of the year that we know we're going to see the increasing fires, the increasing smoke, that both physical and mental health outlet to have kids and young people have and adults have a place to go to play basketball, to just exercise together. You know, we really missed our swimming pool being open this year, and the idea that we could have a year-round facility that could create programming for all ages, all economic classes is something that's really promising. And I think finally, just the diverse, when I think of all these innovative ideas for businesses, different industries, different sectors, I do see a changing and diversifying job workforce that's here. And I know we've got major parts of our community who are multi-generational and want to stay here, want to stay a part of this valley, don't want to leave. Don't want to commute from far away to get to work in the valley. And I think some of these changes that are being proposed in the task force report can help get us there. So thanks everyone for your work. And I'm going to pass the mic to Alyssa Jumars with the Methow Conservancy.
Thanks, Kelly. Okay, so as a participant in the Climate Action Task Force, I volunteered to reach out to several of the farmers and ranchers that I have the pleasure of working with through my role at the Methow Conservancy as an ag coordinator. So I just wanted to share with you really quickly, I surveyed about 24 farmers and ranchers and asked them essentially 4 questions. Number 1, what are the impacts of climate change that you are already observing or preparing for? And number 2, what additional support do you need to be able to better prepare? Number 3, what kind of conservation practices are you already using on your farm to either reduce emissions or to build healthy soils and carbon in the soil? And number 4, which of those conservation practices would you do more of if you could afford to? I feel like it's important to share some good news tonight. And I just wanted to share 2 main takeaways from that outreach. Number 1, many of you may already know this, but farmers and ranchers in the Methow Valley have a particularly strong conservation ethic. So it comes as no surprise that the 23 farmers that I surveyed are already actively engaged in a wide variety of conservation practices that support soil health and put carbon back into the soil. For example, using cover crops, reduced tillage, perennial soil covers, holistic grazing regimes, mulches, or a variety of soil amendments that stimulate soil biology. And they all indicated that they would love to do more if they could afford to. So takeaway number 2, all of these farms are already actively preparing for the very diverse and very specific impacts of climate change for each of their operations, whether that is hay, dairy, cattle, orchard fruit, diversified veggies, grain, or farm-to-table meat production. They're all working really hard to build healthy, resilient soils. And many of them are upgrading to more efficient irrigation systems that can better meet the needs of their crops in a changing climate. And some are installing shade or hail or even insect netting. And they're building backup energy systems and implementing fire-wise structure protections. They're planting new drought-tolerant crops or forages or cover crops. They're shifting their growing seasons and building more cold storage. And they're developing new products and new market channels that allow for more flexibility. And yeah, the list goes on. But I think it's important just to recognize how farmers and ranchers are just characteristically pretty tough and clever and adaptable, but they also need and deserve help from all of us. Adapting is going to be really expensive, and farmers are literally on the front lines of climate change. And as a community that cares about working agriculture and that really loves the pastoral nature of this place, we need to put our money where our mouths are and support our farms during the turbulent times ahead. So I'm really excited to pitch an idea to this audience tonight that our community build a farm resiliency fund to help farmers prepare for the challenges that they are already anticipating, as well for those extreme weather events that you simply can't anticipate. So yeah, thank you. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Sarah Lane, who is the administrator who keeps the ship upright at the Methow Watershed Council.
Thanks, Alyssa. Should have a slide here. Thanks. So as we've been talking about, water rose to the top as a pretty very important topic. I started out with the Natural Systems Subcommittee, and we actually sort of needed to form our own little subcommittee on water to just talk about it as a topic on its own. Because as we know, water is essential for our life here, for our towns, our agriculture, our homes, businesses, fish and wildlife, and our natural systems. And I really feel this list is a list with equal standing for each of these water users, because the life that we value so much here depends on abundant clean water for all of these things. So how do we address these needs? With water patterns changing, with drier summers, more precipitation as rain in the fall and spring, one of the priorities we identified is to increase our storage capacity, and extra rainfall could actually create an opportunity here. Last fall, the Methow Watershed Council gathered people for Water 2066 to discuss what we wanted to see in our valley 50 years into the future. One of the questions we asked is, what kind of storage do we all support? And we heard pretty clearly that we don't want to see a big dam. That's not what we want. So this leaves it to us to be creative and use many different ways of slowing down and storing water on the landscape. Several organizations are already doing this. The Methow Beaver Project, Methow Salmon Recovery Foundation are already working on projects that increase natural storage, helping beavers be find a home with landowners where they already live on the river, creating beaver analogs, improving habitat, connecting side channel restoration, and just increasing the complexity on our landscape and our floodplains will help it store more water just by doing that. Larger scale projects are going to have their place in our strategies too, such as improved water delivery infrastructure. Some other big ones are infiltration galleries, recharge structures, and these projects are going to be farther in the future. They're going to take a lot of time, money, and coordination. And essentially, we're just looking for more ways to store water across the basin when it's plentiful and make it more available when it's needed. We must also protect our local water resource use to ensure that water is available for our towns, fish, and homes and businesses. We can use local water banking and drought leasing to address some agricultural needs while supporting healthy natural systems. Trout Unlimited and some other community members are currently working to ensure that our water rights stay here in the valley where we need them. Another near-term need is water for towns, as Mayor Sue had spoken to earlier. And as we've been witnessing, growth is happening rapidly, and our community identifies as encouraging growth in and around the towns as preferable. Both the Watershed Council's Water 2066 project and Resilient Methow processes both show that people support more cluster growth, which will allow for more efficient delivery of services. Stakeholders and community members will need to be involved with crafting a plan that meets our water and infrastructure needs. And I think we'll see work starting on that project in the next year or so. Water conservation and efficiency have a ton of potential for the near term. These strategies can be used by large farms to home gardens. It can be as simple as encouraging the use of rain barrels or drip irrigation to really smart and efficient equipment for irrigating large acreage. Many of the water goals that you'll see in this plan already have people working on them. As this plan puts into action, bringing these folks together and sharing information and getting creative will help us meet all these goals. Next, I'd like to introduce Kent Woodruff. He's a retired wildlife biologist, and he'll be speaking on the natural systems priorities that we are working on. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. There we go. Start video.
You're good to go, Kent. We can see you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that help. Thank you, Sarah. You know, it's exciting to me that we're doing this. It's fun to have worked for a while to be part of this team. Sally, I want to shout out to you to be able to say thanks for saying let's do this. Let's do some things rather than plan for it anymore. And I think that's what's happening. Julia, it was fun to see from your perspective that 73% of the respondents did a good job of saying this is a top priority. So very quickly, Natural Systems looked at these 5 things here on our assignment and tackled what's going to happen for these areas. What I was encouraged about is there are lots of bigger things that are currently being worked on, like forest management for the next 10 decades, as Mark pointed out, trying to take care of some of the big things that we are going to want to hang on to, like really good, intact, resilient habitat. And like Sarah, you just mentioned, making sure that we have water for the resources that we all need, especially in-stream water for animals. What I'd like to do is highlight 5 key things that I think are examples of what we can do in little efforts individually or small collectively to be able to tackle some of the things that are going to make things better for wildlife and fish and plants while we're turning down the carbon faucet. Next slide, please. So stream temperature is one of the very most detrimental things that is happening to climate change for our aquatic systems. In this slide, you can see some trees that are providing shade on the stream. Stream shade is one of the best offsets for stream temperature impacts. And so the science is let's hang on to as much stream shade as we can. This is an example of that. That's a small thing that we can do, taking care of the trees that are along the streams. Next slide, please. Here's an example of something that happened last week. A local resident here in the valley drove over the loop and found some dead pine siskins along the highway that were attracted to de-icer salt along the Loop Highway. Now, local Audubon group is working with Department of Transportation to tackle what alternative ways we can use to make sure our roads are safe with less attractive de-icers. Next slide. Recently, researchers from Washington State University and University of Washington found that there is a chemical in entire rubber that is shed onto the roads that washes into streams and rivers that kills salmon. That was just out last week. What we can do here is find a place for the road or the snow that we take off the roads in our towns and try to make sure that we're not putting that close to the rivers and streams so that it melts and also goes into the stream to cause problems for salmon. So we'll offset some of the impacts that climate change is providing for salmon if we take care of where we put some of the offset snow removal. Next slide. When we disturb soil, we get weeds. I think we all know that. That's something that is a common thing that we're all working on trying to fight here in the valley. This is a weed called burdock. Burdock is a weed that is difficult for bats because bats get entangled. It's like Velcro for bats. So one of the things that we can do to help all wildlife in the face of climate change is to make sure that we're not disturbing more soil than we need to, and to reduce weeds that we are seeing around us. Next slide. Finally, as Sarah mentioned, we can be careful with water. If we reduce our water use, if every one of us reduced our water use by 5%, that would be a huge amount of savings that would be beneficial to certainly all of our natural systems that need water, but also all of us that need water. So these 5 examples are some that give us a chance to understand that if we work hard to make things better for plants and wildlife, it is the best thing that we can do while we're trying to reduce our carbon output and reduce the impact of climate change. So these small things collectively, there are a million things that we can do if we continue to try to pick off all of these things. So thank you very much. I'll pass it back to Mark.
All right, thank you all of our task force members for sharing and elaborating on some of the solutions and options. It was really helpful to get more in depth, so really appreciate that. So now we move to Joshua, who's going to talk a little bit about the next phase of this work, community involvement and the implementation. So